How about this gentleman right back here?
What do you see as the benefits and the drawbacks of No Child Left Behind, and do you think it should be reauthorized?
I think it needs to be dramatically changed. That's what I would do. And then see what happens after we dramatically change it. If we dramatically change it and it's still not working, we should ditch it. But it needs to be dramatically changed for a variety of reasons. Number one, it hasn't been funded. Number two, it is unbelievably disrespectful to the teaching profession. I mean, it treats teachers like they're robots. We just lived through this with my 9-year-old who went through 3rd grade in public school in North Carolina. Both my kids were in public school and finished 1st and 3rd grade this past year. And they spent half the year, more than half the year, getting ready for the end of grade test. And she had a good teacher, but it interfered enormously with the teaching process. And no child ever learned anything from filling out a bubble on a cheap, standardized multiple choice test. I've got this friend down south who has a different way of describing it. He says, you know, you don't make a hog fatter by weighing. I never know whether to use that line or not. I can use it down where I'm from, but I never know if it'll work here. The bottom line is we need to dramatically restructure the way it's being done. Follow the child, which is a concept that's being used here in New Hampshire, makes a lot of sense. What we ought to be doing instead is to expand the criteria that's being used. We ought to look at analytical skills, free thinking skills, a whole group of skills that we're not evaluating now. We ought to get the teacher involved in the evaluation process, much more actively involved in the evaluation process. And we ought to be looking, instead of one group of 3rd graders versus another, we ought to be looking from the beginning of the year to the end of the year how each individual child is progressing. And we've got to get rid of this cookie cutter approach, but from the federal government. I mean, the way I think about it is, you picture in your mind's eye one school that's subject to No Child Left Behind, where the kids wake up in a wealthy suburban neighborhood in Connecticut, beautiful manicured lawns, huge houses, or they're driven to school, they come home, they have the most fancy technology available to them, spend time with their families. That's school number one. School number two, in the inner city of Detroit, where a lot of the kids are moving constantly, moving from one place to another. They're without a home part of the time. They don't have parental support at home. They live in a completely different environment. And both schools are subject, and many languages used in their schools, and both schools are subject to this exactly the same cookie cutter approach. It makes no sense. One size does not fit all when it comes to educating our children. And we still have 2 public school systems, by the way, in this country. One for rich areas and one for poor inner city schools and poor rural areas. And it's not right. And we have an obligation, I feel an obligation as president, to do something about that. And then, if I can just mention a couple other things related to education that aren't specific to no. Oh, last but not least, we need to help schools. If their schools actually is struggling, instead of punishing the school, we need to give them the resources and the expertise they need to help. I just want to mention a couple other things about education that are unrelated specifically to No Child Left Behind. We need universal pre-K. We need every child in America in a 4-year-old universal pre-K. We ought to go earlier than universal pre-K. We do something in North Carolina called Smart Start. It can be used nationally, where we did basically from the much younger age deal with the health care and the nutritional needs of children and child care needs. I also want to create a national teaching university, similar to West Point. And the idea is this. We'll go across America, we'll recruit some of our most talented young people, bring them to this teaching university, give them an absolute state-of-the-art education, and pay for it. It's free. And what they give us in return is when they graduate, they'll go to the most difficult, the places in America where they're most needed. So we get the most talented people, we give them the best education we can give them, and then we send them out across America to help teach in the most difficult places. And then beyond that, I also want to create second chance schools because we have such a high dropout rate in our high schools in America. A lot of those kids, of course, started dropping out when they were in second grade. But when they're in high school, if they drop out, we need to have second chance schools so that there's an easy mechanism for them to go back and finish their education. Anyway, those are some of my ideas.